Hello and welcome to Euphoria. This channel explores designing, creating and building models for a LEGO city. We'll be exploring the joys and challenges of building official LEGO sets and designing and making modifications and my own creations. In this series of videos, I'll be explaining how I developed the concept, design and build for a LEGO creation of my own design, a MOC. I'm creating a building for my LEGO city. It will be an old astronomical clock that sits in the centre of the town and is a historical landmark and tourist attraction. In previous videos we looked at the development of the concept for this model and the various stages of design for this MOC. If you haven't seen them yet, you might want to look at the previous videos in this series. There's a link in the card above and in the description below. So, having completed the design, we're going to start on the build for this MOC. In this video, which is part 8 of the series, we'll look at how to procure the parts that we need for the build. This video will be followed by further videos covering the rest of the build of the MOC. Look out for those coming up. In previous videos we completed the design for the MOC and I showed you one of the prototype builds that I made to try things out. I designed this MOC in LEGO Digital Designer, so I have a pretty accurate idea of what this MOC will look like and the parts I need to build it. It's a modular building representing an old astronomical clock tower. It's built on a standard base plate as a corner modular building. It's built over 3 stories that will be separable in modular style. It has an astronomical clock at the front of the building and a fountain at the side. Inside is a museum and a small shop. The idea is based on the LEGO Harry Potter clock tower and parts of the LEGO Harry Potter Whomping Willow set. I already bought and built those sets, so I have some of the parts for this MOC already. I've developed the design through a number of design stages, and the design now calls for lots of other LEGO elements that I will have to obtain. In previous videos I developed the concept for this model into a final design for the building. Now we're starting on the build for this MOC. I'm going to consider the build in 3 phases. And in this video I'm going to discuss the first of those, which is procurement. So I need to work out which parts I need and where to get them from. During this phase I'll be dealing with creating a parts list, procuring the parts, receiving and storing the parts, updating the CAD model and preparing for the build. I'll deal with purchasing decisions in this phase, and the result will be all the parts and preparation we need to start the build. So I call this the P phase of the build process. In this phase I'm going to be using quite a few computer tools and websites, and it'll be quite detailed. After adding all the interior details, fixtures and fittings and furniture, the piece count has grown to 2,200 pieces. That's comparable with, or slightly less than, a typical modular building from LEGO. The actual cost of the pieces will depend on how I do the procurement of the parts, which I'll look at in this video. For this particular MOC, I'm fortunate that I already have a lot of the parts I require. So I'll be trying to make the most use of those parts to minimise the amount of additional bricks that I need to buy to complete the build of this MOC. So I'm going to break this down into 5 steps. Number 1 is create a parts list to tell me what I need to buy. Number 2, work out the sourcing, that is, where to get what I need to buy. Number 3 is order the parts, so split them into different orders and execute those orders. Number 4, check the deliveries, that's receive the parts, check them and update my inventory. And number 5 is monitor the costs, which is very important to work out how much this is all costing me. So the first thing to do is to make a parts list. This needs to be an accurate representation of all the parts I need to make the model. I will typically do this by exporting the parts list from the CAD model and then fixing any inconsistencies and issues that I discover in forming a rationalised parts list. That sounds quite straightforward, but there are a number of complications that I'll explain. There is a function in LDD to export a bill of materials or parts list directly into an Excel file. That's great, but actually the limitations of LDD mean that I need to fix some aspects of the model before I finalise the parts list. To get round this, I will import the LDD file representing the model into Studio. Studio is a CAD program provided by Bricklink, which has recently been acquired by the Lego Group. Although it has some limitations and issues, it is improving rapidly, and it's now getting to the point where I could do the design in Studio instead of in LDD. So Studio does have an import function. I can use the import function to bring in the model from my LDD file. Studio used to have quite a lot of issues with this process, but they've recently improved it, and so most of the parts actually import into Studio very well. There is some tidying up to do in Studio. I need to check for and fix parts that haven't imported properly, or where the position information has caused position conflicts in Studio. So I can adjust the parts in Studio. Of course, it wouldn't be necessary if I designed it in Studio in the first place. Here's a couple of examples of fixes that I need to do in Studio. The Lego Digital Designer program, LDD, isn't maintained anymore, and the parts palette has fallen behind what's actually available. So I've used some substitute parts to represent the ones that I really want. In Studio, I can check for parts that weren't available in LDD and substitute the correct ones. So for example, the two roof pieces that weren't available in LDD are available in Studio. So I built them using other parts in LDD, and I can now correct the tower roof in Studio to use the parts that I actually want to use. Another example is that the grille or lattice windows are not available in LDD for the 1x2 windows. So I put glass pieces in them as placeholders in LDD, and now I can change those glass panes for lattice pieces in Studio. I can't fix everything in Studio, and there will still be some manual adjustments later. For example, not all types of decorated parts are available in Studio, so the clock face and the patterned round tiles that I'm using for the astronomical clock are not yet available in Studio, so I've had to use plain tile placeholders. I won't go through them all, but having done those fixes in Studio, I can now make a first attempt at creating a parts list. Studio has the ability to export the parts list in a number of formats. It also has the ability to upload the list of parts required for a model to a wanted list on the Bricklink website. But before I do that, I'm going to export the parts list into a database that I maintain in Excel. To do this, I export from Studio to a file. So Studio, export as, and select partslist.csv. That creates a comma-separated value file, which I can export into Excel. Then I can adjust the information to the format that I use in my database. When I do that, I get 415 entries, which represent all the different types of parts in the different colours that I need for this design. Unfortunately, I find that 84 out of those 415 entries have no element ID, which I call a PCC. That's 20% of part types that don't export into the parts list properly, and that represents 272 pieces out of the 2,200 pieces, which is about 12%. So that means actually I've got some issues with the model. And at this point I'm going to use my draft parts list and the issues that it throws up to fix things that I'm finding wrong in the CAD model itself. That usually means I've used bricks that don't exist in the chosen colour, or some that are incorrectly exported by Studio, and I need to sort those out. Some of those, for example, are minifigs, which I just used as placeholders in the LDD model and don't represent actual minifigs. Colour selection can be an issue, so I have to check for and fix parts that were in the wrong colour in LDD and need correcting in Studio. So actually some colours don't translate between LDD and Studio very well, mostly because of the limited colour palette in LDD, especially Nougat in LDD, which should be medium Nougat. I also need to fix issues where I've used parts that just aren't available in the chosen colours. This might be by changing colours or substituting parts. For example, unsurprisingly, the 3x3 plate isn't available in tan, so I changed some parts around in the design so that I don't need that type of plate. Then I need to recognise the parts that I already have, because I obviously don't need to buy the parts that I already have. As I explained during the design phases for this MOC, I wanted to use the design style and palette of colours from the Harry Potter sets for this design. So I bought the Harry Potter Whomping Willow set and Harry Potter Clock Tower set to use as a source of ideas and parts. So to account for those parts that I got from those sets, I imported the parts lists for the Harry Potter Whomping Willow set and the Harry Potter Clock Tower set into my database, which tells me those parts that I already have from those sets. I actually got the parts inventory from the website brickset.com. You can do this by finding the set in the Brickset database by looking for the set number and then using the website function View Inventory. That lets you download the inventory as a CSV file. After sorting out the columns of data that I need, I can insert the data into my inventory database. I can then do the same for the parts contained in the Whomping Willow Castle, but as I only had part of the set, I had to delete the parts for the car, the tree, and the minifigures that I don't have before inserting the data. I'm surprised to find that this leads to further adjustments to the design and to the parts list. There are several cases where I've made mistakes or been inconsistent in my choice of parts. In some cases I've chosen one type of part in the design, but I have the equivalent part in stock or in the sets I'm using. For example, in the design I've used part design ID 3063, which is a brick rounded 2x2 with an inside and outside bow, but I already have some of the equivalent bricks, design ID 85080, which is very similar. It's a brick round 2x2 with inside and outside bow and a reinforced underside. So I adjusted my model and my parts list to use the bricks I already have, and so I don't need to buy them. Sometimes I've used two different types of part where one type will do. In a CAD design, such as Studio or LDD, it's difficult to tell these apart. In some places I've used one type and in other places the other type, so I might have two part numbers in my design where really I only need one type of part. I can rationalise these and this makes the buying easier. and the model more consistent. So eventually I'm able to work through the issues until everything is resolved. Altogether, I was able to fix all the parts issues in the studio model, or make a note of where it still had issues, such as patterned parts, that I can adjust later. So having done all those fixes, finally I'm able to export the model from Studio into a parts list that I can use. At this stage, I also create my wanted list on the bricklink.com website. This is a fairly easy step. You need a Bricklink account, and to make sure that you've logged into that account in Studio, which is quite cleverly integrated with the Bricklink website. Then you can just use the Upload button to upload your model into a wanted list. You can name the wanted list to represent your model. From this point on, I maintain both a wanted list in Bricklink and a parts list in my database. You'll see why in a minute. Now I need to work out where to get the parts to build this MOC. Choosing where to get the parts and the suppliers to get them from is one of the most difficult parts of the procurement process. You can be caught out by minimum order values, different prices from what you expected, quality variations, shipping charges, and suppliers who only have a few of the parts you need. I'll definitely have to place multiple orders for a MOC of this size. I've made a separate video on sourcing because it's quite a big topic. See the link in the card above and in the description below. In that video, I explain how I choose where to buy Lego bricks and the ordering process for the parts I need. I can potentially get Lego for this MOC from lots of different places. I could use the stock of parts and sets that I already own, if I already have parts that I need for this MOC. I can buy sets for cannibalizing, adapting, or to put in stock. I could visit a Lego store and see if the Lego Pick-a-Brick wall has any of the parts that I need. I can order online from lego.com using their Pick-a-Brick parts ordering service, or I can order online from lego.com using their Bricks and Pieces parts ordering service. I can look for the bricks I need on Bricklink, choosing the stores I want to buy from, and also choosing whether to buy new or used parts. Of course, used bricks tend to be cheaper than new bricks, but that isn't always the case. So you have to look around different sources to get the best deal for what you want to buy. There are lots of other places to buy bricks, including various other websites and marketplaces like BrickOwl and eBay, but I'll be concentrating on sourcing my parts from lego.com and Bricklink. Placing orders is the step where I make shopping carts and actually spend the money to order the parts I need. I used Bricklink and Lego parts ordering, although there are other sources of bricks. I showed the creation of shopping carts on the Bricklink and Lego.com websites in my video on where to buy Lego. I made haul videos for some of the purchases that I made for this MOC, although they included a lot of parts that were for other projects and ideas as well. So through quite a long process, I managed to source all the parts I need for this MOC from a combination of Bricklink stores, Lego Pick-a-Brick online ordering, and Lego Bricks and Pieces online ordering, plus the use of some sets and parts that I already had. So where did I actually get my Lego from for this particular MOC? The design uses some parts that I already have in stock or have already bought, and I can use some parts that I already have to substitute for some of the elements that aren't critical, like interior decorations, where I can perhaps change colours of some of the parts. It turns out that I have about 6% of the bricks I need to build this MOC from my stock. So I'll mark those off as already procured, and I don't need to buy them. For this MOC, I already bought 2 sets that make a significant contribution to the parts I need, and actually formed part of the inspiration for making the MOC. They provided 25% of the parts I needed for this MOC. I made a couple of visits to LEGO stores while I was doing the design for this MOC, and this let me keep an eye out for bricks on the pick-a-brick wall. Although I picked up several cups of useful looking bricks for other MOCs, not that many of them were useful for this one. I think only about 5% of this MOC has been sourced from the pick-a-brick wall. Next, I looked at sourcing parts direct from the LEGO website. Sometimes this can be the cheapest option, or the easiest option, to get the quantities and types of the parts I need. In my database, I keep track of the typical cost of parts, and where LEGO can supply parts at a good price, then I'll look to use them. I mark those items that I can get from LEGO in my database, and I also mark them in the wanted list that I have in Bricklink. Then, if I can't find a store selling them cheaper on Bricklink, I'll buy them direct from LEGO. In the end, I bought 29% of my parts from LEGO Online, of which most were from Bits and Pieces, and the rest from Pick-a-Brick. I sourced the remaining parts from various stores in Bricklink, either where it's cheaper than buying direct from LEGO, or where LEGO doesn't have the parts available. And I'll explain a bit more about that in the next part of this video. I bought 34% of the parts for this MOC from Bricklink. I prefer to buy new parts, and 3/4 of those I bought from Bricklink were new. But I did accept buying some used parts, and so 1/4 of those I bought from Bricklink were used parts. So in the next step, I check deliveries against what was ordered, and against the delivery list if there is one. I count the items, check them for the right colour, quality, or any defects with any of the items. I do tend to knoll and photograph my deliveries so I can easily see what I've bought. It also makes it easy to count the parts and check them off the checklist. Then I enter the parts into my parts database so that I know I have them available. The next part of this phase is preparation for the build. If I'm buying parts for stock, then I'll put them into my storage system by shape and colour. Obviously that makes it easier to access them when I'm free building or finding parts for a particular idea that I have. When I'm buying parts for a specific MOC, then I tend to still organise them by shape and colour, but I'll put them aside into boxes, bags or trays for each MOC that I'm buying for. That way they don't get used in another build. When I've finally got all the parts I need, I'll generally collect them together and find a clear space in which to start on the build phase. So when I've finished the procurement, this is what 2,200 LEGO pieces looks like. They're all sorted out into trays by shape and size, ready to start the build. Because I've sorted them into trays, I probably won't knoll them as I often do for my other builds. If I laid them all out individually, it would take a lot of time and a very large space. I've also done some preparation for the build itself. I've used the instruction maker in LEGO Studio to break the build into a number of building steps. I've broken the CAD model down into sections and layers of bricks and used the instruction maker to show clearly the parts I need and the layout of each section. This will show clearly where to place the parts when I'm building the model. These are not really full instructions, but they should help a lot when I'm building the model physically. Of course, I can always go back to the studio model if I'm not clear, and I can look at it from different angles if I need to. And lastly, just a final word about cost. I've been pretty diligent about checking where the best place is to get the parts for this MOC and buying from the cheapest sources. I've also used parts from the sets that I've already bought. Altogether, this MOC will cost me about £210. That includes an element of the shipping costs associated with getting the parts, but as I have also been buying other parts for stock and for other MOCs, some of that cost is shared. I spent £75 on the clock tower and £31 on the Whomping Willow, and a proportion of that cost has been factored into this MOC. The most expensive single item was the base plate. Other parts varied from 1p upwards. I must admit I did buy some used parts. If you get these from a reputable supplier and they're from recent sets, they can arrive in excellent condition. Where I've sourced older parts, particularly those with stickers, I've had to do some cleaning. But given that this MOC contains about 2,200 parts, I think it's pretty good to get the whole thing for just over £200, which is an average of about 10p per element. So that's how I did the procurement of all the parts I need for this MOC. I created the parts list, worked out where to get the parts from, ordered the parts and sorted them out when they arrived, all in preparation for the start of the actual physical build of the MOC. Look out for the next video in this series, in which I'll be starting the physical build of the actual model. Thanks for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more videos about LEGO modular buildings.